Hey guys, Michelle from OG Rose. I just wanted to hop on and record a reflection. Essentially, I want to explore the concept of symptoms in the body being a form of communication to us, and how the shift in perspective can really change the way in which we relate to ourselves and to dis-ease at large. I've been studying the works of Saint Hildegard von Bingden. She's a German abbess in the Catholic order in the High Middle Ages, and then also the work of Dr. Hammer, who was a oncology doctor, and both Dr. Hammer and Saint Hildegard have very, very interesting ideas as it relates to healing and medicine. And Saint Hildegard was a polymath and had lots of incredible contributions, but I've been studying her works on medicine lately. And then Dr. Hammer, he did extensive research after he had a significant conflict shock when his son was shot and murdered, and this was obviously very devastating, and he developed testicular cancer after that, and he healed from that. But he started to notice patterns that he would see in cancer patients in his oncology ward, and so he started to gather research on how the brain and brainstem, specifically as it relates to embryology and the layers of the embryological development as it relates to different organs of the body, and how certain conflict could and in his research showed a pattern of manifesting in certain diseases. So he did that specifically with cancer, but then he also saw patterns related to other diseases. So anyway, what I find really interesting about both St. Hildegard's work and Dr. Hammer's work is that both of their work really reframe symptoms. In St. Hildegard's work, what I gather from it is that symptoms are expressions of the body that are trying to indicate something to us, something that we may need to face and do something about. In the sense of symptoms are not necessarily just something you do something about in the sense of numbing it, excising it, suffocating it, eradicating it. Like, yes, the hope is that you are able to move beyond the symptomology, to not have those symptoms anymore. But her approach is not by just numbing them and essentially ignoring them, like just putting it on mute, right? But the person's still, just think about like a phone call, and then the person's talking, but you mute them, like they're still talking, right? But you can't hear them anymore. That's what a lot of times maybe a more mainstream approach might be. Not that it's intending to be like ignoring the symptom. It's just, it's doing like to be empathetic to that. It's just trying to help resolve it, right? To get it over with, in the sense of just not have to deal with that anymore, which again can be understandable. But the approach of St. Hildegard is to say, wait a second, she seems like she was a very, her revelations were divine. I mean, she had these divine visions and revelations and mystical visions about the body. And she, unlike other mystics who sometimes had like almost out-of-body experiences of mystical, visions, she stated how she was always very conscious, very awake, very much in her body, which I think is very interesting. But anyways, her revelations revealed, if I can say that, her revelations indicated that the body and its symptoms were asking us to face something and do something in the sense of a type of spiritual work, and that this wasn't completely disrespectful of, or is that the word? Yeah. It wasn't disregarding the natural world around us and our environment. She was very, very knowledgeable about herbs. She was very knowledgeable about things that could aid the body in healing. But there was a almost co-laboring between the spiritual work and the physical things that could be done, taken, or attended to. And she always drew on that which was in one's own context or ecology, in terms of herbs or, particular types of almost ritualistic items, such as linen that could be used in a compress, for example. So yeah, the main thing though that I want to highlight is that the way that she's thinking about symptoms is not to put on mute, but to actually hear what the symptoms are saying, so that they don't keep persisting to try to get your attention, so that you actually hear them and see them, and then it actually allows you to level up in that that spiritual work and relationship to yourself and to those around you and to your environment. And so that, in that sense, the symptoms are resolved. But and she has a very personal, in her own life, there's a personal example of that where she would have these mystical visions, and revelations, and felt that it was, perhaps she was meant to write them down, but she felt that would not be humble of her to do so. And so even though she had felt that from God, that he was instructing her to write them down, she didn't. And she became quite ill, bedridden. I don't exactly know what her ailments were, but it wasn't until she started to write out her visions, or have a scribe write them, or what have you, but record her actual mystical visions, that it was only when she started to write them down that she became well again. And so that was just one, that's just one example from her own personal history, of thinking through why symptoms may be related to what is your life, what are you actually doing in your life, right? And doing something about it may look different than just, some sort of external thing that you can just take that's kind of out of the context of your life and your ecology and your environment and your relationships, right? Some sort of like top-down something that you can just take, and then everything's better. Not that can't ever work or anything like that, but it kind of also puts into question, what does it mean for it to work? And so, for Saint Hildegard, from what I've studied so far, her idea is that symptoms, again, are speaking to us. They're communication of the body, and it's almost as if the body is saying, hey, this is something you need to pay attention to. This is something you need to do. This is something you need to wrestle with. This is something that you need to be brave about or courageous about. This is something you need to confess for the sake of you healing, and no longer having to have the symptoms say, hey. It's getting your attention, right? In that sense, the body is really, truly, it's a miraculous. It makes me think of how the word symptom reminds me etymologically of symphony, right? Where it's actually trying to get you to hear something for your good, not to punish you, not to make you suffer, but for you to be able to actually become a higher version of yourself. So that's kind of the thoughts on Saint Hildegard there. Again, her work is quite profound and extensive, and I've only kind of scratched the surface of it. What I think about is what I think is interesting as it relates to Dr. Hammer's work is that in his research, and I don't know if I already said this, but bear with me if I'm repeating myself. In his research, he started to see that symptoms that people consider to be being sick, right, were actually the body recalibrating itself and actually healing. The healing was what, it kind of makes me think of when people say the healing hurts. But what's interesting is that the healing is that process, or what he identified in his research is it was that process of people feeling that they were sick, but really that was the body's healing response to a conflict active phase where the body was basically working to try and do something about the conflict. And the body did that on it because it can't really understand metaphor, but it can say that's related to this particular organ, that then it's going to, basically overcompensate to handle that situation. But then in the process of healing, it's no longer needing to do that overcompensation. So in that recalibration is this healing phase, and that's where a lot of times people think, oh, I'm sick. But what that approach does, and so this is where I see, again, they're related, St. Hildegard and Dr. Hammer. However, it's a bit distinct in that this healing is the healing hurting sort of thing is really actually, again, the healing. This sounds so simple, but it's quite a profound distinction, or I don't know, reframing to understand it, because it's not like this is something that is actually, like, it's a problem in that it doesn't feel very good, but it may actually just be the body doing what it needs to do in order to be better, to no longer feel those symptoms anymore, to no longer be experiencing the pain or the discomfort or the irritation anymore. So if somebody cannot kind of accept that, then what can potentially happen is another conflict on top of that, where it's like, oh no, I'm sick, I'm not well, like this is, I'm all of the things that come with our minds and our emotions that get fearful and worry, and and understandably, like you care about your life and your well-being, but if you see your body as for you and those symptoms as for you, whether it's in the St. Hildegard paradigm, at least my interpretation of it, where, hey, it's trying to communicate something to you about your life, about how you may be able to grow and develop and not only like heal, but also become like in a Catholic sense, maybe more saintly, even more fully human. So yeah, anyway, I just think there's something really, really fascinating if we start to think about symptomology as indicative of some type of revelation and communication about our own life. And I think that is really hopeful and in many ways exciting, and also a bit daunting. But to think about the ability to have access to that type of communication, and to not only hear but respond and embrace and co-labor toward creating your life in its fullness, in its potential for development and reaching up to a higher self, really, that is so incredible. That's really, truly incredible. And the higher self language might be a bit abstract, and I'm not sure that either St. Hildegard or Dr. Harmer would use that type of language. But really, I do think there is a lot of power in it. There's a lot of power in such a revelation, is all I'm saying. And I think that power, again, it can be exhilarating, daunting. It can also make one feel like they might be crazy to think that is something we may have access to. But I think if we think about it from the spiritual perspective, I don't think that it's contrary at all to the concept of God allowing us to have that type of power, in the sense of not for like some egoic, greedy perspective, but a power to actually have agency and to have choice and to have co-creation in the world and in the earth as the people he's made us to be and put us on the earth to be. So anyway, thanks so much for listening. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or anything that it brings up for you, feel free to share. Thanks so much.